In 1903, a widow named Bridget Callahan fed 7 children in a 2-room tenement on Mulberry Street with less than $3 a week. She made the same 5 meals in rotation for 4 years. Her youngest son lived to 96. The meal he credited is number 4 on this list. Number 19 costs less than $1 to make today. Number 7 was invented on a factory floor by a woman who had 30 minutes to feed 12 boarders before the next shift. These 25 meals were not cuisine. They were engineering, built by Irish women who crossed an ocean with nothing and fed families in the most expensive city in America on wages that would not cover a single restaurant meal. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten Irish immigrant meals that kept families alive in New York in the 1900s. Number 25, stirabout. Before there was oatmeal in a microwave packet, before there were overnight oats in mason jars, there was stirabout. Irish immigrants brought this with them in their bones. It was the first meal they knew and the last one they forgot. A handful of oatmeal, sometimes cornmeal when oats were too dear, stirred into boiling water with a wooden spoon until it thickened into a dense, gray porridge that stuck to the sides of the pot. A pinch of salt. Maybe a splash of milk if the grocer on Mott Street had any left at the end of the day. That was the whole recipe. In the tenements of the Lower East Side, stirabout was breakfast 6 days a week. A 5-pound bag of oats cost about 8 cents in 1905 and lasted a family of 6 nearly 2 weeks. Mothers served it in the same chipped bowls every morning while children dressed for school in kitchens that doubled as bedrooms. The porridge sat in your stomach like a fist. Heavy, warm, and stubborn enough to carry a dock worker through 6 hours of loading cargo before he ate again. Nobody called it a superfood. They called it Tuesday. Number 24, boxty. In the old country, boxty was made from whatever potatoes survived the winter. In New York, it became the meal that Irish women made when they had potatoes and nothing else. Raw potato, grated into a bowl, mixed with leftover mashed potato, flour, salt, and enough milk to make a batter. It was fried in a hot pan with lard or bacon grease until the edges turned golden and lacy and the center stayed soft and dense. A pound of potatoes cost about 2 cents at the Washington Market in Lower Manhattan around 1900. Flour was a penny a cup. The whole batch cost less than a nickel and fed 4 people something hot and filling. In counties Cavan, Leitrim, and Fermanagh, the saying went, "Boxty on the griddle, boxty in the pan. If you cannot make boxty, you will never get a man." The women who brought this to New York did not need the rhyme. They needed the meal. And they made it every week in kitchens so small you could touch both walls with your arms outstretched. Number 23, bread and dripping. When the Sunday roast was finished, and it was usually a cheap cut of beef or a scrap of pork bought on Saturday night when the butcher marked everything down, the fat that collected in the roasting pan was poured through a cloth into a jar. That jar sat on the windowsill in winter or in the coldest corner of the tenement kitchen. For the rest of the week, that dripping went onto bread. Thick slices of day-old bakery bread spread with a layer of cold white fat and sprinkled with salt. That was lunch. That was sometimes supper. The dripping carried the ghost of whatever meat had rendered it, a faint flavor of beef or pork that made plain bread taste like something more than survival. A loaf of bread cost about 5 cents. The dripping was free, already paid for with Sunday's dinner. Children ate this walking to school. Fathers ate this on the docks between shifts. It was the most common midday meal in every Irish tenement in Manhattan for 30 years, and almost no one alive today has ever tasted it. Number 22, Colcannon, mashed potatoes, cabbage or kale, butter if you had it, dripping if you did not. That was colcannon. The potatoes were boiled and mashed rough, not smooth, leaving lumps that gave the dish its character. The cabbage was shredded fine and wilted in the pot until soft, then folded into the potato with whatever fat was available. A well in the center held a melting knob of butter. You ate from the outside in, dragging each forkful through that pool of fat. In Ireland, colcannon was a harvest celebration. In New York, it was a Wednesday. A head of cabbage cost 2 or 3 cents in the pushcart markets along Hester Street. The potatoes were the cheapest thing in any grocery. This meal sustained families through months when meat appeared on the table once a week at most. The Irish women who made it were not following recipes. They were following memory. The same hands that had made colcannon in a cottage in Kerry made it in a 5th-floor walk-up on East 4th Street. The potatoes were the same. The cabbage was the same. Only the view from the window had changed. Number 21, Caudle, Dublin. Caudle crossed the Atlantic and settled into the tenement kitchens of Hell's Kitchen and the West Side. Pork sausages and rashers of bacon layered with sliced potatoes and onions in a heavy pot, covered with water, and simmered low for hours until everything melted together into a pale, soft stew that barely held its shape. The sausages split open and released their fat into the broth. The potatoes dissolved at their edges, thickening everything. The onions turned translucent and sweet. A pound of pork sausages cost about 10 cents in 1900. Bacon ends and scraps, the pieces too ragged to sell as proper rashers, went for even less. This was a Saturday night meal in Dublin, and it became a Saturday night meal in New York. Mothers put it on the stove before evening mass and came home to a kitchen that smelled like the one they had left behind 3,000 miles away. The word caudle means to cook gently. That is exactly what this meal did. It asked almost nothing and gave back everything. Number 20, Champ. Champ was colcannon's simpler, quieter cousin. Mashed potatoes mixed with chopped scallions that had been gently warmed in milk until the green softened and the milk turned faintly onion-flavored. The milk went in hot, turning the mashed potato loose and creamy. A lump of butter pressed into the center. That was the entire recipe. A bunch of scallions from the Fulton market cost a penny. The potatoes were already there. Champ was supper on the nights between meals, the dinner that appeared when there was no meat, no stew, no plan. Just potatoes and whatever green thing was cheapest. Irish families ate this without shame because there was nothing shameful about it. It was warm. It was filling. It tasted like butter and earth and the last good thing before bed. Mothers in Yorkville and Woodlawn served it in the same cracked bowls their mothers had used in Galway. Number 19, potato soup, not the creamy, garnished version served in restaurants today. The tenement version, potatoes chopped rough, an onion diced small, a heel of bacon or a piece of ham bone, if there was one, and water, simmered in a single pot until the potatoes fell apart and thickened the broth into something that coated the spoon and warmed you from the chest outward. No cream, no stock, no herbs beyond a bay leaf if the woman downstairs had one to spare. A pot of potato soup cost about 6 cents to make in 1905 and fed a family of 5. The broth was thin but filling, carrying just enough fat from the bacon heel to feel substantial. Mothers served it with bread for sopping and called it supper. The soup itself was the color of dishwater, pale and unimpressive, but it held heat for hours in those poorly insulated tenement kitchens. You could leave it on the back of the stove and come back to it at midnight when the cold crept in. It would still be warm, it would still be enough. Number 18. Fadge. Potato bread, not the kind you buy sliced in a plastic bag. The kind made from leftover mashed potatoes mixed with flour and a pinch of salt, rolled flat, and cooked on a dry griddle until brown spots appeared on both sides. The outside went slightly crisp, while the inside stayed dense and starchy, somewhere between bread and a pancake. In Ulster, fadge was part of the traditional fry. In New York, it was breakfast by itself, maybe with a smear of dripping or a scrape of butter. It used up yesterday's potatoes, which meant nothing was wasted. The flour extended them. The griddle transformed them. A woman could make fadge with her eyes closed because she had been watching her mother make it since before she could reach the stove. For children heading to school in the freezing tenement hallways, a piece of warm fadge wrapped in cloth was the thing that got them through the morning. First, pattern break. Here is what most people do not understand about Irish immigrant cooking in New York. These women were not choosing to cook simply. They were performing an act of financial engineering that would make an accountant weep. In 1900, an Irish laborer in New York earned $1.50 a day when he could find work. Rent on a tenement flat ran anywhere from $8 to $12 a month. That left, after rent, maybe $20 to $25 a month for food, clothing, coal, and everything else a family of 6 or 7 needed to survive. The average tenement kitchen had a coal stove, 1 pot, 1 skillet, and no refrigeration. There was no running hot water. There was no counter space. The kitchen table, if there was one, also served as the ironing board, the children's homework desk, and the bed for the boarder who paid 50 cents a week to sleep in the corner. Every meal on this list was designed for exactly these conditions. 1 pot, 1 burner, no waste, no leftovers, everything eaten, everything counted. This was not poverty cooking. This was survival mathematics performed 3 times a day by women who had crossed an ocean to do it. Number 16, oxtail stew. The butchers on 9th Avenue practically gave oxtails away. Nobody with money wanted them. They were bony, fatty, and looked like something that belonged in the rubbish bin. Irish women knew better. They bought oxtails for 3 or 4 cents a pound, browned them in a pot with onions, added water, carrots if there were any, a potato or 2, and simmered the whole thing for 3 hours until the collagen dissolved into the broth and the meat slid off the bones in dark, silky shreds. The broth turned the color of mahogany, rich and sticky with gelatin that coated your lips when you drank it. 1 pot of oxtail stew fed a family for 2 days. The bones were boiled again the next morning to make a second, thinner broth for soup. Nothing was left behind. Every molecule of nutrition was extracted. Modern restaurants now charge $28 for braised oxtail and call it a delicacy. In 1905, it was what you bought when you could not afford anything else. Number 15, boiled bacon and cabbage. This was the meal that defined Irish America. A piece of boiled bacon, not smoked American bacon, but a joint of cured pork, shoulder or back, simmered in water for 2 hours until tender. In the last 30 minutes, a quartered head of cabbage went into the same pot to cook in the pork broth. The potatoes boiled alongside or in a second pot of salted water. That was it. The bacon was sliced thick and laid across the plate. The cabbage, soft and slightly translucent, carried the salt and smoke of the pork. The potatoes soaked up the juices. A piece of cured pork shoulder cost about 12 cents a pound. A head of cabbage was 3 cents. This fed 6 people a proper dinner with meat on the plate. In Ireland, this was Christmas dinner for many families. In New York, it was Sunday dinner, the one meal of the week where the table felt abundant. The smell of boiling bacon drifted through tenement hallways and told the neighbors everything was all right. You could afford to eat this week. Number 14. Soda bread. No yeast, no proving, no waiting. Flour, buttermilk, bicarbonate of soda, and salt. Mixed fast, handled gently, shaped into a round cross slashed on top, and baked in a hot oven for 40 minutes. The buttermilk reacted with the soda to create the rise, and the bread came out with a thick golden crust and a soft, dense crumb that was nothing like bakery bread and everything like home. Buttermilk cost about 3 cents a quart. A 5-pound bag of flour was 12 cents. One loaf fed a family for 2 days and went with everything: soup, stew, dripping, tea. Irish women baked soda bread every other day because it was faster than walking to the bakery and cheaper than buying a loaf. The cross on top was not decoration. It was tradition. Some said it let the devil out. Others said it was a blessing. Everyone said it made the bread bake evenly. The crust shattered when you broke it with your hands, and the smell of it baking in a tenement oven was the closest thing to Ireland that a cold New York kitchen could produce. Number 13. Stewed tripe. The stomachs of cattle, cleaned, bleached white, and sold for next to nothing at the butcher stalls along 10th Avenue. Irish women bought tripe because it was cheap, about 5 cents a pound, and because they knew what to do with it. Sliced into strips and simmered for hours with onions, milk, and pepper until the rubbery texture softened into something almost velvety. The milk turned into a thin, savory sauce that thickened slightly from the gelatin in the tripe, served with bread for sopping. The flavor was mild, almost bland, which was the point. It carried the seasoning you gave it without fighting back. Men who worked the slaughterhouses and packing plants sometimes brought tripe home directly, cutting out the butcher entirely. Mothers cooked it without complaint. Children ate it without knowing what it was. The whole neighborhood smelled of simmering onions and milk on tripe night. Nobody talks about tripe now except as a joke. But in those tenement kitchens, it was protein on the table when nothing else was affordable. Number 12. Cockle and mussel soup. The old Dublin street cry of Molly Malone followed the Irish across the Atlantic. Along the wharves and fish markets of Lower Manhattan, cockles, mussels, and clams were among the cheapest protein available. A quart of mussels cost a few pennies. Irish women scrubbed the shells, dropped them into a pot of boiling water with onion and a splash of milk, and waited for the shells to open. The broth that resulted was thin-in, briny, and deeply savory, tasting of the ocean and the onion and the milk all at once. Bread soaked up what the spoon could not reach. For families living within walking distance of the Fulton Fish Market, shellfish soup appeared regularly on the table because the ingredients were practically free. Damaged shells, undersized catches, and end-of-day leftovers went for almost nothing to anyone willing to carry them home. This was peasant food from the coast of Ireland, transplanted to the coast of Manhattan. The ocean changed. The soup did not. Second pattern break. Here is something the history books skip past. Irish immigrant women in New York were feeding families in conditions that modern health inspectors would condemn on sight. Tenement kitchens had no ventilation beyond a window that opened onto an air shaft. Coal stoves filled rooms with fumes. Water came from a shared tap in the hallway or the yard. Ice for the icebox, if a family even owned one, cost 5 cents a block and lasted 2 days in summer. There was no refrigeration for most families until the 1920s. That meant everything was bought fresh daily or preserved with salt. Number 10. Pig's feet stew. Meat purchased in the morning had to be cooked by evening or it spoiled. Milk soured overnight in warm weather. Bread went stale in a day. Every meal on this list reflects those constraints. The reason these recipes are so simple is not because Irish women lacked imagination. It is because they had no margin for error. A ruined meal was not an inconvenience. It was a crisis. A pot of burned soup meant children went to bed hungry. The simplicity was the intelligence. Butchers on the west side could barely give pig's feet away to anyone who was not Irish. They sold for 2 or 3 cents apiece, bony and gelatinous and unappealing to anyone who did not know what they became after 3 hours in a pot. Irish women split the feet, covered them with water, added onion, carrot, a bay leaf, salt and pepper, and let the whole thing simmer until the connective tissue melted into the broth and the small pockets of meat between the bones turned tender enough to pull free with your teeth. The broth set into jelly when it cooled. Reheated the next day, it was even richer. 2 pig's feet and a couple of potatoes fed a family dinner for under a dime. The collagen in the broth was the same substance that modern wellness companies now sell as a supplement for $12 a jar. Irish grandmothers did not need the label. They needed dinner. Number 9, porridge bread. When the stirabout from breakfast went cold and sat in the pot like cement, Irish women did not throw it away. They mixed the leftover porridge with flour, a pinch of salt, and a bit of dripping, shaped it into a flat round, and baked it on the griddle. The result was a dense, slightly sweet bread with a chewy interior that was completely unlike anything made with flour alone. The oats gave it a nutty depth. The griddle gave it a crust. This was waste turned into a second meal, the kind of kitchen alchemy that happened when throwing food away was not an option. Children ate porridge bread with tea in the afternoon. Mothers wrapped it in cloth and sent it with their husbands to the docks. It traveled well. It filled you up. It cost nothing because the ingredients had already been paid for at breakfast. This was the kind of trick that never appeared in any cookbook because no one considered it a recipe. It was just what you did. Number 8, herring and potatoes. Salted herring was the cheapest fish in New York. Barrels of it arrived at the docks from the North Atlantic and sold for pennies per fish. Irish families had been eating herring for centuries. The salt-cured fish needed soaking overnight to draw out the brine. Then it was simmered or grilled and served alongside boiled potatoes with a bit of butter or dripping. The combination was ancient, simple, and complete. The fish provided protein and fat. The potatoes provided starch and bulk. Together, they covered nearly every nutritional need a working body had. A pair of herring and a pound of potatoes cost about 7 cents total. That fed 2 adults or 3 children. On Friday nights, when Catholic families ate no meat, herring and potatoes was the default across every Irish parish in Manhattan and the Bronx. The smell of salt fish cooking in a tenement kitchen carried through walls and floors, announcing Friday to the entire building. Number 7, boarding house stew. This was the meal invented by necessity in the cramped tenement flats where Irish women took in boarders to make rent. A dozen men needed feeding in 30 minutes between shifts. The answer was a massive pot of stew made from the cheapest cuts of beef or mutton, potatoes, onions, carrots, turnips, and water. Nothing fancy, nothing precise. Whatever was cheapest at the market that morning went into the pot. The stew simmered all day on the back of the coal stove, and men ladled it into bowls as they came and went. The potatoes thickened the broth. The fat from the cheap meat made it rich. Bread was served alongside to stretch every bowl further. A boarding house woman could feed 12 men for about 60 cents a day and still make a profit from their rent. This was not hospitality. This was a business model, and the stew was the product. It was thick, brown, unidentifiable in its specifics, and exactly the same every day. Nobody complained because everybody was full. Third pattern. Break. Here is what the food industry erased. Every one of these meals was built on a principle that modern grocery stores have spent a century trying to destroy. Buy the cheapest ingredients, use everything, waste nothing. There is no brand loyalty in a bag of oats. There is no advertising budget behind a pig's foot. The profit margin on a head of cabbage is fractions of a penny. That is why no one markets these meals. That is why no celebrity chef builds a show around stirabout or bread and dripping. The foods that kept Irish immigrants alive in the most expensive city in the world were the foods nobody could make money from. Instead, we were sold convenience. Canned soups, frozen dinners, boxed mixes, each one replacing a meal that cost a tenth as much and delivered twice the nutrition. The economics are not complicated. They are just invisible to anyone who never had to count pennies at the pushcart market on Hester Street. Number 5. Black pudding. The blood of a freshly slaughtered pig, mixed with oatmeal, onions, fat, salt, and spices, packed into casings and boiled until set firm, sliced and fried until the outside crisped and the inside stayed dark and crumbly. In Ireland, black pudding was made during the autumn pig killing, when every part of the animal was preserved. In New York, Irish butchers on the West Side and in the Bronx made it fresh and sold it for a few cents a link. It was iron in edible form. Women recovering from childbirth were told to eat black pudding by other women who understood what blood loss did to the body long before doctors had a name for anemia. Fried with an egg on Saturday morning, it was the most nutritious breakfast a working family could afford. The taste was rich, mineral, and deeply savory, nothing like anything else on the plate. Children either loved it or refused it, and mothers did not argue either way. There was always someone at the table who would finish what the picky ones left behind. Number 4. Irish stew. This was the meal that Bridget Callahan made for her 7 children. Neck of mutton, the cheapest cut available, hacked into chunks on the bone. Potatoes in layers. Onions sliced thick. Water to cover. Salt and pepper, nothing else. The pot went on the stove in the morning and simmered until evening. By supper time, the mutton had surrendered every trace of fat and flavor to the broth. The potatoes had half dissolved, thickening the liquid into something between a soup and a stew. The onions had disappeared entirely, leaving only sweetness behind. Neck of mutton cost about 6 cents a pound in 1903. 2 pounds, a few potatoes, and an onion fed 7 children and their mother for under 15 cents. The bones were fished out at the table and the marrow sucked clean. The broth was sopped with bread until the bowl showed bare. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left. Every Irish family in New York had a version of this. It was the first meal daughters learned to make. It was the last meal grandmothers remembered how to cook. It was not the best thing on this list. It was the most important. Number 3, Colcannon cakes. When last night's colcannon sat in the pot cold and stiff, mothers scooped it by the handful, shaped it into thick patties, dredged them in a bit of flour, and fried them in bacon grease until a dark golden crust formed on both sides. The cabbage inside caramelized slightly against the heat of the pan, turning sweet, and the potato held its shape just enough to give the cake structure. These were served for breakfast, for supper, or wrapped in cloth and carried to work. They cost nothing because they were made from nothing, leftovers transformed by heat and fat into something children asked for by name. Some mothers pressed a bit of leftover meat into the center before frying, creating a poor man's filled pastry that was better than most things that took 3 times the effort. Colcannon cakes were never written down in any cookbook. They were passed from mother to daughter through demonstration. You watched, you learned, You made them the same way 40 years later in your own kitchen without thinking about it. Number 2, potato and leek soup. When Irish families discovered that leeks were cheap and plentiful at the New York markets, they adapted the old potato soup into something with a depth and sweetness the plain version never had. Leeks, sliced thin, were sweated slowly in a bit of butter or dripping until they collapsed into soft, silky ribbons. Potatoes were added next, diced small so they broke apart quickly. Water to cover, salt, simmered for 30 minutes until the potatoes dissolved into the broth and the leeks gave up their gentle, almost floral sweetness. The finished soup was pale green and ivory, thicker than broth but thinner than porridge. It could be made for about 8 cents, and it fed a family with bread on the side. On winter nights when the tenement walls ran with condensation and the coal stove struggled against the cold, this soup was medicine. It warmed you from the inside. It asked nothing of tired hands. It forgave every mistake. You could not ruin it if you tried. Number 1, tea and bread. This was not a meal by modern standards. It was the most important one on this list. Strong black tea brewed in a pot, poured into cups, sweetened with sugar, and served with bread. Buttered if there was butter, plain if there was not. Every Irish tenement kitchen in New York started and ended the day with tea and bread. It was the first thing offered to a neighbor who came through the door. It was the last thing consumed before the lamp went out. A pound of tea cost about 20 cents and lasted a week. Bread was 5 cents a loaf. Sugar was 4 cents a pound. For less than a dime a day, a family had something warm to hold, something sweet to taste, and a reason to sit together at a table in a room that might be cold, might be crowded, might be falling apart at the seams. Tea and bread was not nutrition. It was civilization. It was the Irish immigrant woman's declaration that no matter how bad things got, this kitchen was still a home. The kettle was still on. The table was still set, and anyone who walked through that door would be fed. That ritual held families together through poverty, through loss, through winters that tested everything they had. It cost almost nothing. It meant almost everything. Here is the challenge. Make one of these this week. The boxty, the colcannon, the Irish stew. Boil a potato and mash it with cabbage and butter. Put the kettle on and sit at the table. Then come back and tell me if those women were just getting by or if they knew something we forgot. Share the one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the Irish stew gets more love than the colcannon cakes. Because these were not just meals. They were how women with nothing kept families whole in a city that gave them no reason to believe they could.